All right, here's one of the most important topics when it comes to wars. That is the war at home and how it affects society, the steps taken to mobilize or get organized for the war, get resources ready, how it affects American society. Big topic always when it comes to wars, and when there's a wartime issue. Got to know these things during the wars and how it changes things forever. 1916 campaign 1 year before we entered the war. 1917, because of the unlimited submarine warfare, Mr. Wilson's campaign was, I will keep you out of war, and he kept us out of war in that previous first term of his. And so this is what he wins on. This colored map here is a little bit backwards. This really should all be blue. You can see this should be solid south. He's a Democrat, and Republican north. We still see sectional politics going on here a little bit. The first thing he wages and the government wages in the war is basically a war for the minds and hearts of Americans and the support of the public, psychological warfare, you might say. And he believes that we need to train the entire nation to work, think, and live for the war. And essentially, that's what we do. It becomes a total war. Messages, slogans, symbols that you'll see in the poster showed to some World War I music here in a little while, or that you already did see to begin class. Was that it's a war to end all wars. It's going to be a better world after this, a very progressive idea. Remember, he's a progressive president, democracy. It's going to be a war to spread democracy, and it's a war of good versus evil. And we see that a lot in these particular cartoons and posters for the war, remembering little Belgium and the image of the bloody hand coming up from the depths of the waters, reflecting the ideal, the viewpoints of submarines. What can I do for the war? How do we get people to live the war and support the war? Well, you can do it in very simple everyday things. Recycle metals, recycle almost everything that's out there, paper, conserve things, substitute one good that's necessary for the war for another thing, work longer hours, volunteer, keep your ears open and eyes open for disloyal words, disloyal acts, report it. We'll talk more about that later. Boy, even if you like fruit, any of these fruits, if you save the pits off of any of these fruits, you can turn it into a local collection point, and they will turn those pits into the filters for the gas masks in this war. So anybody can do that. Simple little things. Don't eat as much, eat more cottage cheese instead of eating meat, which is vital for the war effort. Eat cottage cheese. It has protein too, so there's a substitution with that. All kinds of little things. And so this becomes really a very deep concept in American life, that there's all kinds of little things that you can do in just a few years here. The whole country is in on this war effort. Mobilizing for the war, we have very small forces compared to the armed forces of the countries that are at war in Europe, and the government is going to basically take over the economy to produce as much as it possibly can, as fast as it can, to win the war effort. The National War Labor Board establishes a 8-hour workday, which had never happened before, a limit on work to provide more work and to schedule work and make it more efficient. The government recognizes the workers' rights of unions, labor here for the first time, really, and it's all out of the interest of unions, or excuse me, out of the interest of winning the war. You can imagine when the war is done, the government support for workers' rights kind of goes away. Before this, we know we talked about how the government always sided with big business and industry, so war has an impact on the work in the work environment and labor significantly. But workers had to also sign agreements that they would not go on strikes as well, no strike pledges, so that the war effort, the production, wasn't hurt. If the supply of machine guns and weaponry doesn't get to the soldiers, somebody's going to die. Workers during the war, millions of male workers leave their jobs to fight in the war effort. Of course, women step in significantly. This war is going to change the gender roles and the viewpoints of women significantly from here on into the future, and these particular women are going to have the daughters. Their daughters are going to be the women who also do the same thing in World War II. They take all the jobs held by men in every possible aspect of industry and factory work, and most of them are young and signal, and they do man's work, and they are essential to the war effort and war effort production. Here we see a cartoon that kind of portrays a little bit of a question for Americans by saving wheat. Here we have the women of France basically doing hardcore labor work, substituting themselves for horses that aren't available because horses were heavily used in the war and at the front, and plowing the fields to try and feed them. We should help those poor people, and by if you remember from the last lesson, also we should help the French because they helped us win our independence in the Revolutionary War. Workers during the war, again, you can see here great examples of, and some American women kind of emulating that particular poster there. Women making all kinds of factory munitions, explosives, doing every single thing that was necessary. They were a part of it in the factory system. So this is going to have an impact on their political rights. It's going to help bring about the 19th Amendment, and it's going to also change how women think of themselves and see themselves in the post-war period in the 1920s. Discrimination and hatred rise and is always an issue during the wartime period as well. 1919, the last year of the war, was called Red Summer because there was a significant amount of violence during that year. Large numbers of African Americans and other minorities move into white neighborhoods. They start to go north for jobs. Job competition ensues, and the result is race riots, 1917 and 1919 in particular. And this was called the Red or Bloody Summer of that year. Here again, women doing work in a munitions factory, most of them being young single girls. This is going to kind of give them the message and the idea and the realization that I don't have to get married at a young age. I can work a job and support myself and maybe get later. So the marriage age gets a little bit later here with this in our post-war time period. This will happen in World War II as well. The Great Migration is really going strong during this war. This is one of the key effects of both the wars that we get into here, both the world wars. There's a great mixing of the population. We talked about the Great Migration starting even before in the 1890s because of poll taxes, Jim Crow laws, segregation, violence in the South. This movement of African Americans out of the South into the North for industrial jobs was happening before, but now with the war, it becomes a flood, and Mexican workers also come in to replace some of that lost labor on some of these southern farms as well. And so there is a great mixing of the country here and the blending of the country, and this is going to help set up, and is part of the reason why that violence and a reflection of the violence is going to happen because of minorities coming into neighborhoods that weren't used to having those minorities and did not like necessarily the job competition that's going on here. And this chart kind of shows how during this time period, 1819, this Great Migration was helping push us into more of an urban society. The rural society is a little bit in decline. The two are going to meet and going to clash here in the 1920s. We'll talk about that more later. All right. So again, this is a very violent time. The war does produce violence and conflict over that. How do you pay for the war? World War I cost the United States about $32 billion at that time. We pay for it through the selling of war bonds on your birthday. Maybe your abuelita or papi gave you a war bond, or excuse me, a government savings bond to cash in someday. Basically, it's a secure piece of currency that the government gives you. When you give them some money, they take the money, they spend it on war materials and supplying and fighting the war, and in X number of years you get that exact amount of money back. Here in this case $100 plus interest. So you're fighting the war for good versus evil, the war to end all wars. You're helping support and finance democracy, and you make money on it at the same time. And people can actually do this because wages go up when the demand for goods goes up during a war. And this is always a big theme, and you need to kind of jot this down. Demand for goods goes up during a war. That means that the prices of things go up as well, but people are also making a little bit more money than they had before, so there was an availability of this. And we'll talk about the inflation aspect of things a little bit later. A third of it was paid for taxes. 2/3 was through the selling of bonds. And you'll see in the, as you saw in the poster show, there were a series of bond drives to finance the war. As money was needed, there would be another bond drive. Here you can actually buy a savings stamp that was used to put things in the mail with, for example. But basically, money is being made during this war, as we talked about before. Buying and selling war materials, corporate profits go up and soar. Farm income goes up when a farmer, and this is a keynote also, during the war makes more money because of the demand of goods going up. Prices go up for them. They make more money. They're encouraged strongly to go out and till more land, to raise more crops, to help support the war and the Allies. That means they go out and take more loans. Make sure you jot down right here, they take out more loans. This is going to be a problem when the prices crash again. We talked about that in the past. They take out more loans. Prices crash, they're going to start losing their farms after the war. Producing war supplies. Key individual that we need to know here is future President Herbert Hoover. He's appointed the U.S. Food Administrator, and he basically coordinates all of the conservation efforts and substituting programs of food and foodstuffs, and the growth of an allocation of food supplies and rationings for in the United States. And this will help feed the refugees in Europe after the war and feed the Allies during the war as well. He'll become a household name because of this, as you can see in this particular little placard here. Come on, let's Hooverize. They play and music goes along with it. He becomes very well known and is very successful at that. Incredible mind at organizing something on a very massive scale. And then there's here another patriotic song that was called Hooverization of Our Nation. Very catchy. Eatless days were very common as well. Don't eat meat on this day, don't eat eggs on that day. Kind of very thematically set up so everybody could kind of remember to really focus on one particular thing, and in that way millions of people are doing it. It results in a significant amount of money, food that is saved for the war effort and for the soldiers. Victory gardens, everybody could plant one. That's what the nickname was for the gardens at the time. Plant more at home. Don't buy the food that was at the store, so that it can be saved for a soldier. Even if you're living in New York City or a major city where you don't have a plot of land, you can go ahead and put a seed in a pot and you can grow something like a simple tomato. Producing war supplies also comes back to the control of industry and the regulation of industry at this time. The War Industries Board, you'll read about that in completing your graphic organizer. Purchased materials for the United States and the Allies to make sure that exactly what was needed was purchased to produce the things that were needed to fight the war. Rationing of resources, controlling industry, even controlling the railroads and shipping industry to make sure everything was where it needed to be at a particular time. This is where we get the concept of daylight savings time. You kind of see it reflected here. A little guilt trip also. You're in bed, and what do the Germans do? They're out there working. Get yourself out of bed. Daylight savings time actually adjusts the clock so that people are working when it is light out, and if they are not working when it's dark out, it means they're not burning electricity and energy to create the electricity in order to produce the war material. So that saves coal in this sense. And so this is where daylight savings time comes and eventually becomes a commonality throughout the remaining years in the future. Shorter work week for non-war factories, those factories and industries that are producing consumer goods that weren't necessary for fighting and winning the war and defeating the enemy. They regulated how much they produced and how long they also worked. Conservation also then gets into and helps bring about this thing called prohibition. Prohibition starts out as a moral issue, but then it becomes a win the war kind of an issue, and it becomes a national law, national amendment, because of the fact that grain, sugar, coal, workers, transportation, all those things expended on producing alcohol now are needed to win the war. It's a waste. It's immoral. You're not helping win democracy that way. Actually, if we're hungover workers, we're not going to be very effective workers, and we're going to make a bad gun that could cause somebody to die if it misfires, for example. And so it's World War II that really causes this to become a national amendment, and the power here of the government and of Congress, you can see, is going up. This is another major theme. Every war you have, there's power of government increasing and expanding. It never really completely goes away. It will go backwards a bit and decline, but it's always going to be kind of stretched out and grow in size here. And the largest employer in the country is really going to be the federal government. One of the things that they do during the war to protect common people from inflated prices because of the increased demand is try to fix some of those prices, fix the prices of basic goods. It is a problem during this time, did cause some stress. They'll fix that in World War II. 1916, 1918, number of federal employees doubles. Again, the power and the size of government increases always during these wars. Controlling public opinion, and another thing that always changes and always happens and becomes an issue during the wars is that civil rights and civil liberties become infringed upon. And in this particular case, a good example here is the socialist candidate for the presidency of 1912, Eugene V. Debs, a union leader, opposed the war. The Socialist Party opposed the war significantly. They blamed the war on just a plot by businessmen and industrialists and bankers to try and make money off of it. It hurts working people. Pacifists also were targeted here during the war because they didn't believe in war of any type or violence of any type to solve a problem or an issue. And so one of the interesting things here about Eugene V. Debs is that he broke the law and was arrested and sent to prison for speaking out against the war, and he actually runs for the presidency in 1920. Socialist Party candidate, again in jail. Individual rights, two key laws you've got to know. The Espionage Act was passed by Congress during this time, putting people in jail, kicking them out of the country for spying for a foreign government. You didn't have to be proven guilty. The evidence could be very flimsy. If you were associated or thought to be associated with spying or espionage, you're going to be kicked out of the country, jailed, fined, deported. Kicked out of the country is what deported means. There was a constant advertisement for watching out for these people who could be spies. And you can imagine people of German background, they are going to be the ones that are one of the biggest targets in all this. Controlling public opinion is part of this of effort to get everybody's mindset and psychology about the war. The Sedition Act is passed also, and sedition is basically using disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the Constitution, the government, the military, the flag, the war effort. It meant that if you were passing out placards or flyers to do not join the draft or report for the draft and to conserve or support any of the war efforts, you could go to jail for 20 years, get $10,000 in fines, that kind of thing. And so really you should be thinking, okay, First Amendment rights, yeah, they can go away. And people got put in jail because of this during this time. And so it's an example of that. We'll see more examples of civil liberties being stepped on and hurt at that particular time. In terms of looking for spies and looking for acts of espionage and enforcing the Espionage Act, America has its largest immigrant group, cultural group are Germans of heritage, cultural heritage group. The Germans are the largest number of anyone in the entire country. And so anybody who was German became suspicious. They were looked at a little bit different. Schools were banned that were German in background. Kindergarten comes from German culture and German background. German music, if you think of some of the German artists like Bach and Mozart, those individuals, that music just didn't get played anymore. The German language wasn't spoken anymore, and many Germans that had just gotten into the country kind of kept their language and liked to speak it. If you read the primary document, you get checked that you picked up in class about it was you couldn't eat kraut and get a rope. You'll see that they were very heavily targeted there with that. Cabbage or sauerkraut became renamed Liberty Cabbage. Sausages were renamed Liberty Sausages. Hot dogs were called Liberty Pups. Germans changed the pronunciation, the spelling of their name permanently forever because they didn't want to stand out. Things like that. And so Germans were very much targeted. Make sure you read that particular little article about kraut. A Supreme Court case that comes up that challenges the stepping on of individual liberties and civil liberties, the infringement of civil liberties, is the court case called Schenck versus the United States. And in this court case, the Supreme Court said unanimously that the Espionage Act is legal. In this particular case, the Socialist Party leader mailed pamphlets urging resistance to the draft. And in their conclusion, the Espionage Act is constitutional in that free speech does have limits, in that those pamphlets that were passed out presented a clear and present danger to the welfare and the safety of the country. And that still has a little bit of weight yet today, in a sense. So that is a very important concept and very important case. And so civil liberties, again, stepped on and they kind of go away. An important committee, an organization to know, the Committee on Public Information, also nicknamed the Creel Committee because it was run by a guy named George Creel. It was a government agency that was all about advertising and promoting the war, and pretty much all the slogans and all the things you see here in terms of musicals and plays, and Hollywood becomes really big. Hollywood becomes really big and kind of gets its place on the map in our society here because of the war. Those actors that were out there went around the country and sang songs and did performances about the war. And this committee helps promote that thing and those things, types of things. And all these posters with the slogans and such are out there to try and get people on the right page and to see the war all the time, everywhere they go, day in and day out. And they established loyalty leagues, and these loyalty leagues would be in every little community and towns and cities, basically. And the people that were part of the loyalty leagues would go out and try to get people to sign petitions saying, you know, I will swear to this oath of loyalty to the United States and the flag, and they were encouraged to spy on their neighbor, report disloyalty, persecute German Americans and such. And so really it becomes neighbor on neighbor. And if you read the other public primary document I gave you, Get a Rope, you can see where in that particular story, please read it, it is a situation where everybody's got peer pressure to support the war, even though you support the war with buying bonds to support the financing of the war. It's sometimes not enough. And in there, you notice that it talks about people's mailboxes getting painted. There were people who were singled out and visibly identified in communities as being some people who are called slackers. That's a famous term in piece of slang that comes out of World War I. You don't want to be a slacker. You want to do your part. And so this is a big deal. And George Creel Committee on Public Information really got this going, and it worked. There was no really major enforcement of it. It was just something people did, and people took on these messages and these ideas very much in real life. And the government really didn't have to enforce looking for disloyalty very much. It's just what people did, and everybody expected should be done. All right, Memorial Day, May 30th, 1917. This one we've seen before already. Posters. Hope you enjoyed the poster show before. Lots of emotion in a lot of these posters. A little bit of guilt, showing people who are dead, dying, suffering. What are you doing? Are you working hard? Don't switch jobs. Do your bit for little kids. Eat a certain type of food to save another type of food. Eat everything on your plate becomes big during these wars, because if you're wasting food, you're wasting food for the war effort, and that's not cool. That could save a life. Things of that nature, right? Save your old clothes. They can be used for bandages, things like that. This is the end of the home front. Check out some of the cartoons there. Hope you enjoyed the PowerPoint show on the posters of the war with some of the World War I music. They're pretty cool stuff to look at. It was a total war. Every part of society was into it. Civil liberties lost. Power of government goes up, economy gets controlled, and we win the war. Next lesson, Treaty of Versailles, and exactly what happens in the post-war time period. People are not going to be happy. Happy holidays.